Heard on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast weekly on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and one of the first podcasts on the Internet. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1413 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The FCC warns the licensee on out-of-band transmissions. The FCC moves to ban foreign-made home and commercial routers, citing national security concerns. TAT-8, the first cross-Atlantic undersea cable, rises again. We will have the story. AMSAT announces that due to licensing restrictions, digital modes are not allowed on FO20. The Dayton Hamvention announces a theme for the 2026 show. We will tell you what it is. ICOM equips the National Radio Center at Bletchley Park in the UK with new radios. It's almost time for Europe's largest hamfest in Friedrichshafen, Germany. As the Canadian Public Weather Radio goes silent, the NOAA in the U.S. receives funding for new transmitters and to expand its reach. If you are looking for employment, the ARRL has job openings in Newington. The Hurricane WatchNet is looking for net control operators. A new documentary is in production looking at the history of MFJ. And a group charters a flight to the International Space Station from the European Space Agency. We will tell you who is going up in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will present Part 17 of his ongoing Bald Yak radio project. This week he brings us Adventures in Radio Data Systems. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another new edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us back to 1924, where we find that a year or so after QST began its International Amateur Radio Department, amateurs were discussing linking amateur radio organizations around the world. In a speech at the Second ARRL National Convention in late 1923, Maxim said he believed it was time for an international meeting to organize something he called a World Amateur Radio League. This is where the International Amateur Radio Union was born. We will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, AJHB, in the DX Corner with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio just outside of Albany, New York, where the weather has turned really chilly, we're below freezing again, I'm George, W2XBS.
Reporting from our studios in beautiful Bradenton, Florida, where I continue to dodge lightning bolts during my pod activations, I'm Mike Nikolich, K9DX Mike.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, this is George, Kilo Charlie 2, Oscar X-Ray Juliet.
And reporting this week from our news bureau in downtown Syracuse, New York, where March came in like a lion, but finally I see blue skies, hear birds chirping, and there's no more snow. Must be March is going to go out like a lamb. I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our news bureau in Wisconsin, where it's officially the first day of spring, also known as Second Winter's Opening Ceremony, featuring flurries, false hope, and at least one guy grilling in shorts. For This Week in Amateur Radio, I'm Marvin Turner, W0MET.
And reporting from our True New York News Bureau, where the snow is melted but nothing's green yet, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where snow is once again in the forecast, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, Isn't spring just around the corner?
Hello, everyone. Before we get into this week's newscast, I'd like to tell everyone that This Week in Amateur Radio now has its own Discord server. That's right, a place online where we can discuss everything technology and amateur radio. So join us. Just go to Discord on your computer or download the Discord app on your portable device and search for TWIAR or This Week in Amateur Radio. We look forward to seeing you on the new This Week in Amateur Radio Discord server.
Leading off the news this week, the Federal Communications Commission has responded to a complaint involving a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania amateur for operating outside the privileges of his technician class license and causing interference to local emergency service communications by transmitting on a public service frequency of 470.4375 MHz. With more details on this FCC action, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ.
According to a letter released by the FCC's Enforcement Bureau, agents investigating an interference complaint from Allegheny County Emergency Services determined that the interfering signal originated from the residence of David Knutson, KD3ASC, who also holds a GMRS license. The letter states that Knutson gave the agents a BTEC UV Pro handheld, which had been programmed to monitor the county emergency services frequencies, and agents determined that its audio relay feature had been activated, turning the HT into a simplex repeater that was retransmitting the Allegheny County channel. The letter concludes that Knutson, who is relatively a new amateur licensee, surrendered the radio to the agents, and who then verified that the interference to the Allegheny County system had ceased. The letter also notes that Knutson's BTEC radio was certified as a Part 90 private land mobile radio device, and that he was not licensed to transmit on the emergency services frequency. Knutson was warned that unauthorized operation and its associated harmful interference must not resume. He was given 10 days from the date of the March 25th letter to respond with a description of the steps he is taking to avoid a repeat violation. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
FCC agents determined that the interference signal originated from the residence of David Knutson, KD3ASC, who also holds a General Mobile Radio Service license, WSDQ 885. Amateurs are reminded to exercise care when programming non-amateur frequencies into their VHF-UHF radios and to ensure that transmitting on those frequencies is disabled.
The FCC, Federal Communications Commission in the United States, has banned new foreign-made consumer internet routers over national security concerns. In an update on Monday to a list of equipment seen as not secure enough for use, the Federal Communications Commission added all consumer-grade routers made outside the U.S. It puts routers, which are used widely in homes and businesses to connect computers, phones, TVs, and other devices to the internet, on a par with foreign-made drones, which were banned at the end of last year. Malicious actors have exploited security gaps in foreign-made routers to attack American households, disrupt networks, enable espionage, and facilitate intellectual property theft, the FCC said. While people will still be able to use foreign-made routers they already own, the ban applies to all new device models. The ban stems from growing concern over the last year that routers were a point of easy access for malicious actors. TP-Link, a router brand made in China that is a bestseller on Amazon, became the subject of some U.S. political anxiety last year after a spate of cyber attacks. Any new router made outside the U.S. will now need to be approved by the FCC before it can be imported, marketed, or sold in the country. In order to get that approval, companies manufacturing routers outside the U.S. must apply for a conditional approval in a process that will require the disclosure of the firm's foreign investors or influence, as well as a plan to bring the manufacturing of the routers to the U.S. Certain routers may be exempted from the list if they are deemed acceptable by the Department of Defense or the Department of Homeland Security, the FCC said. Neither agency has yet added any specific routers to its list of equipment exceptions. The FCC's move follows a decision on Friday by government agencies working on national security that internet routers made overseas pose unacceptable risks to the U.S. The FCC noted that malicious access to routers was involved in 3 cyber attacks referred to as Volt, Flax, and Salt Typhoon, aimed at U.S. infrastructure between 2024 and 2025. U.S. government investigations into those attacks blamed actors within or working on behalf of the Chinese government. The vast majority of internet routers are assembled or manufactured outside the U.S., often in Taiwan or China. The FCC ban applies even if a router is designed in the U.S. but built abroad. Popular brands of routers in the U.S. include Netgear, a U.S. company which manufactures all of its products abroad. One exception to the general absence of U.S.-made routers is the newer Starlink Wi-Fi router. Starlink is part of Elon Musk's company SpaceX. The company says the Starlink routers are made in Texas.
While you may have never heard of TAT-8, there's a good chance you have sent some data through it. TAT-8 was the 8th transatlantic communications cable and the first transatlantic fiber optic cable carrying 560 megabits per second on 2 fibers between Tuckerton, New Jersey and, thanks to an underwater splitting device, Widemouth Bay, England and Penmarch, France. Construction of the cable began in 1998. Later that year, the first call made by Isaac Asimov took place. The cable was retired in 2002. Now, Subsea Environmental Services is recovering the cable for recycling. The 6,000-kilometer cable was built by a consortium of companies including AT&T, France Telecom, and British Telecom. The 1.3-micron fiber used special optical repeaters about 40 kilometers apart and cost about $335 million, which would be just shy of $1 billion today. Designers were optimistic, with some claiming the cable would end the need for future cables, or at least that the cable would not reach capacity for 10 years or more. In reality, the cable was saturated within 18 months. Turns out the equivalent of 40,000 phone lines wasn't enough. In all fairness, the saturation might have been difficult to predict, but it may also have been hastened by the cable itself. In 1989, IBM funded a dedicated T1 link between CERN and Cornell University. 10 months later, Tim Berners-Lee would use this link to demonstrate his new development, the World Wide Web. According to Subsea Environmental Services, the cable still looked new after lying on the seabed for 4 decades.
Fuji Oscar 29, otherwise known as FO-29 and JAS-2, the Japanese amateur radio satellite launched in August 1996, has entered a period of full sunlight, resulting in renewed and more frequent transponder activity. The inverting analog transponder operates with an uplink passband of 145.900 through 146.000 MHz lower sideband, and a downlink of 435.800 through 435.900 MHz upper sideband, along with a CW beacon at 435.795 MHz. The satellite's 1-watt PEP output is shared across the 100 kHz bandwidth, making careful power management essential for all users. Although the FO-29 linear transponder is technically capable of passing narrowband digital signals such as FT8, FT4, PSK31, or Olivia, such operations are not permitted under the satellite's original licensing from Japanese authorities. The transponder is explicitly licensed for SSB and CW modes only. This restriction stems from the satellite's operational permit issued by Japan's Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, which does not authorize digital emissions on the linear transponder frequencies. Operators attempting digital modes risk non-compliance with international amateur radio etiquette and could contribute to transponder overload, distortion, or temporary shutdowns, issues exacerbated by the high duty cycle nature of many digital signals. AMSAT urges all users to limit their operations on FO-29 to SSB and CW and to practice good satellite etiquette as follows. Use the minimum power necessary to produce a readable downlink signal. Ensure your downlink signal strength does not exceed the CW beacon level. Monitor the transponder before and during your transmission. If the beacon weakens or the passband becomes noisy, reduce power immediately. Keep signals clean and within the passband. Share the limited resource responsibly so that the maximum number of amateurs worldwide can enjoy FO-29 while it remains active. With the satellite now enjoying extended full sunlight operation in 2026, this is an excellent time to explore its capabilities through permitted modes. Experimentation with unauthorized modes is discouraged to preserve the satellite's health and comply with licensing.
ARRL is seeking talented individuals to join our team and help advance the amateur radio service. We are currently hiring for several impactful positions. RFI Lab Engineer. The RFI Lab Engineer supports ARRL's mission to protect and enhance spectrum access by managing and resolving radio frequency interference cases. This role includes database management, coordination with the FCC, and participation with standards bodies such as the IEEE and C63, and contributions to ARRL's Technical Information Service, publications, and member support. Candidates should have strong RF systems knowledge, EMC and RDF experience, and excellent communication skills. W1AW Station Manager. This is a rare opening and exciting opportunity to lead operations at W1AW, the Hiram Percy Maxim Memorial Station. Responsibilities include overseeing daily station operations, maintaining and troubleshooting equipment and antennas, ensuring compliance with emission standards, coordinating schedules and staffing, and supporting the ARRL laboratory when needed. Public Relations and Outreach Manager. Lead initiatives that elevate the visibility, credibility, and impact of ARRL in amateur radio. Responsibilities include developing and executing national public relations and outreach strategies, managing media relations, creating content across print, digital, and social platforms, and supporting advocacy communications. You'll also provide tools and training for ARRL's network of public information volunteers. The ideal candidate is a creative storyteller who can translate technical concepts into accessible language, build strong relationships, and deliver compelling campaigns that inspire new interest in amateur radio. Additional openings at League headquarters include Awards Program Supervisor, Development Associate, IT Support Specialist, Logbook of the World Support Associate, and Membership Manager. We value in-person collaboration, and these roles are 100% on-site at our headquarters in Newington, Connecticut. Full details may be found on the ARRL HR webpage at www.arrl.org/careers. To apply, please email your resume and cover letter to hr@arrl.org.
Hamvention has released the theme and logo for the 2026 Dayton Hamvention Show that will take place May 15th through the 17th. This year's theme is Radio Adventure, which references exploration of the many avenues ham radio offers. Radio has always been about exploration of ideas, technologies, distances, and possibilities. From the earliest spark gap pioneers to today's digital experimenters, satellite operators, contesters, emergency communicators, and outdoor enthusiasts, amateur radio continues to be a gateway to discovery. Once again, the Hamvention will take place May 15th through the 17th at the Greene County Fairgrounds and Expo Center in Xenia, Ohio.
The Hurricane WatchNet, or HWN, is seeking net control operators. Among the criteria sought from operators and stations are those who are located in the central and western regions of the U.S., Canada, Central America, and the Caribbean, and available for overnight operations, midnight to 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Bilingual operators, Spanish and English or French and Creole, and English are especially encouraged to apply. Because net control stations must manage stations across a wide geographic area during difficult propagation conditions, having a well-equipped amateur station is highly beneficial. A tower-mounted beam antenna for 20 meters, reliable 20 and 40-meter HF capability, amplifier capability for strong, consistent signals, reliable internet connectivity, as net control stations coordinate through the HWN internal chat system during activations, and operators willing to make themselves available when hurricanes threaten. As HWN marks 62 hurricane seasons of watching, preparing, and activating whenever hurricanes threaten land in the Atlantic Basin, it is preparing for the 2026 Atlantic hurricane season, which forecasters suggest could once again be an above-average season. Amateur radio operators interested in training to become a net control operator for the Hurricane WatchNet can learn more by visiting hwn.org. What effect does a solar eclipse have on HF propagation? For the answers, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, at League headquarters.
Well, that was the basic question posed by researchers enlisting ham radio operators' help during 3 solar eclipse QSO parties in the last 10 years. The results of that research were presented at the 2026 HamSci workshop held earlier this month in Connecticut and hosted by ARRL. Data was collected based on spots on the Reverse Beacon Network, the WSPR-Net, and the PSKR Reporter during total solar eclipses in 2017 and 2024, as well as an annular partial eclipse in 2023. In the 2024 eclipse, there was a drop in the number of contacts on 21 megahertz as the eclipse neared totality, while there was an increase in the number of QSOs recorded on 14 megahertz. The 30-meter band opened earlier than usual, and 40 meters opened earlier than usual for transatlantic contacts, faded out, and then opened up again. Researcher Kuldeep Pandre of the New Jersey Institute of Technology concluded that the effects of the eclipse crossed over with the sunset terminator, according for the second opening on 40. Effects on 80 and 160 meters were unclear, as only a few stations were active on those bands during the eclipse. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
It was also noted that there were differences in results between 2017 and 2024, attributed to the different phases of solar cycle 25. 2017 was relatively early in the cycle. 2024 was at its peak.
Symbols of national pride and national identity are not being permitted at this year's World Radio Sport Team Championship. Spectators and participants can expect to see plenty of things at the World Radio Sport Team Championship event in the UK this coming July. There will be antennas, rigs, cables, microphones, and keys, and plenty of spectators to cheer on the hams using them. What will not be evident anywhere are any emblems, flags, or other symbols of national identity. The organizing committee of WRTC 2026 has reaffirmed the approach that was used during the WRTC event held in 2023 in Bologna, Italy. This means that, as before, this year's teams will avoid national symbols of any kind. This is especially significant because it is consistent with the competition's qualification process, which identifies all participants by qualification area and not by their DXCC. Like the Olympics, the WRTC is held every 4 years with different host countries each time. They have included Brazil, Finland, Germany, Russia, Slovenia, and in the U.S., San Francisco, Boston, and Seattle.
ICOM UK has equipped the RSGB National Radio Center with the IC905 all-mode transceiver as part of its ongoing support for the RSGB and the amateur radio community. This latest addition ensures that volunteers and visitors to the prestigious Bletchley Park facility have access to the latest VHF, UHF, and SHF technology. The IC905 is an industry first, providing seamless multi-mode coverage across the 144, 430, 1200, 2400, 5600 MHz, and 10 GHz bands. The arrival of the IC905 opens up new avenues for the National Radio Center, from linking local repeaters to monitoring radio beacons for the study of microwave propagation. National Radio Center volunteers were keen to see firsthand the IC905 and operate the industry-first multi-mode VHF, UHF, SHF transceiver. With no previous microwave-capable transceiver at the National Radio Center, volunteers are particularly interested to see how the radio functions and what is possible. This support highlights ICOM's ongoing mission to support amateur radio and the educational work carried out by the Radio Society of Great Britain. By supplying cutting-edge hardware, ICOM UK helps ensure that the National Radio Center remains a world-class hub for radio amateurs and newcomers alike.
A SpaceX plan for 1 million orbital data centers proposes a massive constellation of sunlit objects that could severely impair ground-based astronomy and increase atmospheric pollution through frequent re-entries in the upper atmosphere. Astronomers warn that these 100-meter-long structures will remain illuminated even at midnight. This constant visibility threatens observations at ground-based observatories, such as the Vera Rubin Observatory and the extremely large telescope currently under construction in Chile. These orbital data centers, potentially 100 meters long, create persistent light streaks that obstruct astronomical research. Positioned in high-inclination orbits at 500 to 2,000 kilometers, remain illuminated by sunlight even at midnight, significantly outshining traditional broadband satellites. Astronomers have filed formal objections with the FCC regarding the January 30th application. This new constellation poses a challenge unlike any encountered in the commercial space era, undermining years of progress. Further, this much hardware results in one spacecraft burning up in the atmosphere every 3 minutes. This mass incineration releases dangerous concentrations of aluminum oxide and lithium, potentially depleting the protective ozone layer and altering global temperatures. Environmental experts highlight risks, but the FCC's fast-track approval process bypasses standard environmental reviews, placing the burden of proof on the scientific community to prevent damage.
Filmmaker Preston Booth from Starkville, Mississippi, was hired to shoot a small portrait documentary about a local businessman to celebrate his 82nd birthday. That's when he met Martin F. Jew and learned about the company he built, MFJ Enterprises. According to a post on Reddit, Booth said that once I got to meet Martin and the team, I realized that their story really deserved a feature-length production to best tell their story, and I've been moonlighting this project in my free time ever since. Booth said that he spent a significant amount of time with Jew and his family, friends, and staff. Booth learned about his background, how he grew up, what drew him into amateur radio, and why he started MFJ. He learned that Martin grew up in a family that owned a small grocery store, developed a love of radio at a very young age, and had to build his own equipment from spare parts supplied by a local electronics repairman because his family was poor. After earning his master's degree from Georgia Tech, he moved back home to run the family store so his brother could take time off to travel. It was there that he learned the fundamentals of running a business, marketing, and client relations. These would go on to help him when he started MFJ. According to Booth, Jew viewed MFJ not only as a way to provide affordable products for the average ham, but also as a way to offer locals the opportunity to work. He mentioned that MFJ's first production line was actually staffed by students from Jew's classes at Mississippi State University, where he taught. They built the products in exchange for extra credit and some spending money.
Even as Canada moves to shut down its nationwide weather radio services, lawmakers in the U.S. are looking to commit funds that would modernize and expand the radio network of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency. Lawmakers in Washington, D.C. have moved ahead with their commitment to invest $100 million in improved antennas and transmitter equipment to expand coverage for the VHF weather radio service of NOAA. A bipartisan measure that authorizes the expense was passed recently by members of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. An estimated 1,030 such weather stations hold licenses to operate on 162 megahertz. The antenna and transmitter additions and upgrades focus on NOAA's weather radio service in remote areas of the U.S. that have a higher risk of extreme weather. Beyond VHF improvements, the bill calls for NOAA to explore options on the microwave band to further strengthen the network's ability to communicate warnings about hazardous conditions. Other language in the bill directs NOAA to explore the possibility of satellite backup or partnerships with commercial providers. The action in Washington stands in sharp contrast to a recent announcement by the Meteorological Service of Canada, that nation's equivalent of NOAA, that it was ending Weather Radio, its own national VHF radio weather service. The U.S. lawmakers' measure moves next for a vote in the full House, but is not yet on the calendar. The action on Capitol Hill comes almost a year after the White House announced that the administration was looking to cut NOAA's weather research centers, particularly those focused on understanding climate change.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. Well, we have two DXpeditions that have recently ended, and I'd like to give you an update on both. The first is Juliet 5, Guinea-Bissau. The J51A team has their after-action report back home, and all is well, including their gear. They've worked on the log, busted calls and missing data, as well as working with emails and guestbook entries that they've received. Only a few requests were refused when they couldn't find any similar call signs within 10 minutes of the QSO info the DXer had submitted. On FT8, checking, quote, full text files, they could not find a, quote, valid sequence of reports in RR73 messages for some. The DX log files were merged from the 5 computers and the live stream update server. The final total was, all in, an amazing 256,183 QSOs with 49,878 different call signs. They found Starlink to be very reliable. They were also QO100 satellite QSOs logged on a separate computer. For a quick LOTW confirmation and paper QSL by regular mail, use the Club Log OQRS system. And you can get more information on the J51 Alpha QRZ.com page. And that was truly an amazing DXpedition. Well done. And we have a second one that just wrapped up, the Austral Islands, which is Fox Ocean Stroke Alpha. The Tango X-Ray 5 Echo United DXpedition to the Austral Islands has officially ended operations. On March 24th, the team began dismantling most antennas, keeping only one station active until the evening. By 6 p.m. local time, they went QRT. Despite challenges posed by weather and antenna limitations, the expedition achieved a total of 59,000 QSOs. Early the following morning, the team planned to depart their location and head to the airport, marking the start of their journey home. So an excellent job from the Austral Islands to that group. Well done. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. So first, we have an update on the Charlie Yankee Zero Sierra DXpedition from Sable Island. The CY0S DXpedition started operations from Sable Island on March 18th at 2140 Zulu. Although they intended to use Super Fox mode on FT8, technical issues led them to operate in Fox and Hound mode instead. All 5 stations are now active and a live stream is available via Club Log. And as I check the cluster right now, they are all over the place. So if they don't have them in the log, get them. The next is from Africa, Botswana, Alpha 2. Remo, Hotel Bravo 9, Sugar Hotel Delta, is currently operating from Botswana under the call sign Alpha 255 HD. Yes, that is 255 HD. Having previously been active as Zulu Sierra 2 stroke HB9 SHD earlier in March. He expresses gratitude to Alpha 2 November Echo Whiskey, John, for assistance with his licensing renewal. Remo operates in casual holiday style using an FT891 radio and an EdFed antenna for 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters. So far, he's been reported on FT8 on 20, 15, and 10 meters. QSL cards can be sent via Bureau or direct. Bangladesh is ongoing, and if you follow me, you know I haven't worked them yet, and I haven't heard them yet, so I'm itching to get them. Sierra 2, Bangladesh. The guys are currently off the air as the team is further investigating a noise problem at their QTH. They may have found the issue and are addressing it at this minute. They say QRX and hope to be back on shortly with better receivability. Well, frankly, they are on right now, so they must have got it resolved. Another one I don't have, not that this is all about me, but Macau, X-Ray 9. The X-Ray 9 Whiskey team has begun operations on March 22nd, just before 0900 Zulu. They have been reported on FT8 on 15, 20, and 30 meters and 20 CW. They have 8 rigs, and they're getting the rest of the antennas built, so you're going to hear from those guys. Then we have Tango 31, Central Kiribati. The Rebel DX group announced that their T31 Tango DXpedition to Canton, Central Kiribati, will involve 2 weeks of operations with a possible plan to establish a permanent remote station at the government site on T31. The main focus will be on digital modes, especially to give operators with less powerful stations a good chance to make contacts and to get logged. Duplicate QSOs are not a concern. Participants are welcome to call repeatedly until their contact is verified. The team will also have 1 CW and 1 sideband station active. The digital operation plans include running up to 14 radios simultaneously with 2 radios per band. Multiple frequencies will be active at once using both MSHV multistream and Super Fox modes. As traffic decreases, all stations will return to MSHV multistream operation only. And of course, you can always check their QRZ.com page. And now we have Honduras, Hotel Radio. Kilo November 2 Papa, November 7 Victor Zulu, and Whiskey 7 United Mike are now QRV using the call sign Hotel Quebec 9 Uniform Mike until March 31. They're on 160 through 10 meters sideband CW and FT8, and they're using LOTW for QSLing. They also have the Hotel Quebec 9 X-ray call sign for the CQ WPX sideband contest this weekend. Otherwise, it will all be holiday style. If you were looking for Easter Island, there's been a slight change of plans, and that would be Charlie Echo Zero Yankee. We have a change of plans for Marcus, Delta Juliet 4 Echo Lima. His Easter Island trip, as he expected, was to get the call 3 Golf Zero Yankee Echo, but he will not be able to use that. He now expects to use Charlie Echo Zero Yankee stroke Delta Juliet 4 Echo Lima. Despite these licensing challenges, Marcus's Starlink equipment is prepared for Club Log Live streaming during the trip March 28th to April 11th. So there's a good chance that by the time you're listening to this, Marcus is up and running. From the Gambia, we have, which is 9 Juliet, we have Robert, Delta Mike 7 X-Ray X-Ray, and he is currently QRV as 9 Juliet 2 Romeo Osco from the Fountain Gates Crafts and Trade School until the end of the month. And we have 2 stations in Vanuatu. The first is, which is Yankee Juliet. The first is Chris, Victor Kilo 2 Yankee Uniform Sierra, and he is now QRV as Yankee Juliet 0 Charlie Alpha from Vanuatu until April 2nd, single sideband only. The same gear that he previously used, an IC7300 and a small amplifier and simple wire antennas 40 through 10 meters. He says his main operating times are likely to be between 2100 and 1000 Zulu. And the second operation from Vanuatu is by Aki, Juliet Kilo 1, Juliet X-Ray Zulu, who is also QRV from Vanuatu as Yankee Juliet 1, Juliet X-Ray Zulu until April 3rd. He'll be active on 80 through 6 meters after 5 p.m. local time on weekdays and all day on weekends. From the South Cook Islands, which is Echo 5 Stroke Sierra, we have Frank, Delta Juliet 5 November Quebec. Frank will be operating as E51 Alpha November Quebec from Rarotonga, South Cook Islands until the end of March. He will operate on CW and sideband in holiday-style operations, running 100 watts and a short G5RV antenna at 15 meters of height. QSL cards can be sent to DJ5 November Quebec, either through the Bureau or direct. And here's one I just learned about, and thanks to the Daily DX real-time updates. Coco Skeeling, Victor Kilo 9 Stroke Charlie. Victor Kilo 9 Boston Sugar Alpha is on Coco Skeeling Island, and it's being activated by VK6 BSA. Mark confirmed that he is indeed on Cocos and says, quote, "The ship was finally unloaded yesterday. There were weather delays and the ship could not berth on the island. A barge met the ship at the edge of the lagoon and the shipping containers were lowered onto the barge to be ferried to the port. A long to and fro process, all weather dependent. Mark is waiting for the release of the cargo in port and all required to be checked by, quote, biosecurity." And I've only worked Coco Skeeling once, so I'm really excited to have them get that up and running. This week, the DX Mentor YouTube channel will feature George, KJ6VU of Ham Radio Workbench fame, with a discussion of his station controller and his new product, iShare Radio. It's really interesting and it's fascinating what they're trying to do. So give it a watch and let me know what you think. And that's on the DX Mentor YouTube channel. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
Welcome to the 52nd segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio. Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. With thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for letting us use his website for these segments, we bring you the next chapter of Ham Radio History. April in Paris. A year or so after QST first began its International Amateur Radio Department, amateurs were discussing linking amateur radio organizations around the world. In a speech at the second ARRL National Convention in late 1923, Maxim said he believed it was time for an international meeting to organize something he called a World Amateur Radio League and asked the members to submit their ideas for the ARRL board to consider. ARRL Secretary and QST editor Kenneth Warner echoed the sentiment, declaring that international amateur radio has arrived and we need an International Amateur Radio Relay League, which ARRL would play a part in organizing. The League had just completed a major restructuring, adopting a new constitution on 18 December 1923. After the war, a new board of 17 directors at large had been elected in a poll of the entire membership. While this had worked fine for a while, especially in getting things going again after the shutdown, it failed to provide regional representation. The organization had grown quite a bit in 4 years, and it was time to fix this deficiency. The new constitution provided for one director from each of the 10 ARRL divisions, plus a general manager for Canada. These positions would be filled in an election to be held in April 1924, the ARRL's 10th anniversary year. As international amateur radio communication took off, Maxim set sail for Europe to confer with its counterparts from other national amateur radio organizations. In Paris on 12 March 1924, the group held a dinner for him, organized and chaired by Pierre Corre, chairman of the Inter-Society Committee formed by the 3 French radio societies during the transatlantic tests. The dinner was also an international amateur radio meeting, the first of its kind, and included representatives from 9 countries: Belgium, Canada, France, Britain, Italy, Luxembourg, Spain, Switzerland, and the United States. Denmark, unable to send a representative, sent a letter of support. After dinner, Corre called the meeting to order and spoke in high praise of the ARRL and its president, saying the rest of the world looked to the League for leadership in organizing international amateur radio. Maxim followed with a direct call for the establishment of an international amateur radio organization. Everyone in attendance naturally agreed. That was what they had assembled for, and Maxim was asked to organize a committee to begin the process. 2 days later, the Temporary Committee of Organization, a group of representatives from each of the countries present at the dinner, met to work out preliminary details. They elected Maxim president and Corre secretary, and decided to name the new entity the International Amateur Radio Union. All other countries would be invited to participate in a formal congress to be held in the spring of 1925, at which they would consider a constitution based in part on recommendations solicited from the ARRL. As planned, the new ARRL directors were all elected by their respective division members in April and took office on 1 July 1924. Later that month, the League's board endorsed the creation of the IARU as it unanimously re-elected Hiram Percy Maxim and Charles Stewart as president and vice president to take the ARRL into its second decade. The board also chose to highlight the progress of amateur radio over the previous 10 years by recognizing the organization's founder. With Stewart presiding, the first resolution of the new board was adopted, praising Maxim and recognizing his devotion, sincerity, and ability as having been pivotal in the success of the League, and resolving to tender to Mr. Maxim this unanimous expression of our confidence, love, esteem, and appreciation. The first and organizing Congress of the International Amateur Radio Union was set to run from 16 to 20 April 1925 in Paris. To deal with the language problem, the body would adopt a formal international diplomatic procedure consisting of written monographs which would be handled by subcommittees. They, in turn, would combine their results into a draft convention to be approved by the full Congress. All amateurs were invited to participate in the IARU. However, since it would be a federation of national organizations, only formal representatives of those organizations would have voting privileges. The League itself would send 2 official delegates, and individual League divisions and other U.S. organizations were also planning to send one of their members to the meeting to assist. The ARRL organized a traveling party so that the North American contingent could sail together from New York aboard the Mauretania on 1 April, arriving in Cherbourg 6 days later. They planned to return via England on the Berengaria from Southampton, arriving back in New York on 1 May. A travel agent handled everyone's arrangements. The estimated cost per traveler would be $600, equivalent to about $8,000 in 2014, including meals, hotels, and other expenses, and with 4 hams to a cabin for inside staterooms, second class. One could also fly from Paris to London as part of the return trip for an extra charge of $14. 13 months after Maxim proposed the idea of an International Amateur Radio Society, the first International Amateur Congress was called to order in Paris at the Faculté des Sciences on 14 April 1925, coincident with the International Radio Legal Committee. The two organizations held a joint opening session in the morning, then went their separate ways that afternoon. Amateurs from 23 nations attended: Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, France, Finland, Germany, Great Britain, Hungary, Italy, Japan, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Newfoundland, Poland, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, Uruguay, and the United States. Some French attendees had expected the IARU to include broadcast listeners and engineers and were disappointed when they learned it was to be all about transmitting amateurs, a term increasingly used to distinguish amateurs from other kinds of radio hobbyists. The Americans were expecting the European amateurs to be mostly older and interested more in experimenting than operating. This was all wrong, the French amateur, when we really found him, and all the rest of them are just like ourselves, a noisy, happy bunch of key-pushers of our own age, tooting whistles and discussing circuits and talking QST English, bless 'em, wrote Warner. And so we are happy to record that we found the hams from all around the world all alike in complete agreement as to what they wanted, and looking to Mr. Maxim to lead the way. In addition to Maxim and Warner, the North American delegation included Mrs. Maxim as interpreter, Jimmy Morris, 4IO, and Gordon Haidt, 4BQ, Southeastern Division, Lloyd Jacquet of New York City, editor of Amateur Radio Magazine, Major Bill Borrett, C1DD of Halifax, and L. Reed, 8AR, representing Newfoundland. After the opening joint session, subcommittees were formed to take on various organizational tasks. Each would operate democratically with one vote for each represented country. Subcommittee 1 dealt with formation of the IARU itself. Its 50 members decided that headquarters would, at least temporarily, be located in the U.S., presumably since the ARRL was being used as an organizational model and would be providing its initial operational capability. QST was named the official organ of the IARU, and it would debut an IARU news column in its July issue. The basic outline of a constitution was handed to the subcommittee members on 16 April. Maxim, Metzger, and Warner worked on a draft late into the evening at the Hôtel de Louvre. A large group of hams then commandeered a flock of typewriters and stayed up all night working to produce enough copies of the Constitution in English and French for distribution to all the delegates the following morning. A full IARU Constitution is printed in June 1925 QST on page 14. Warner skipped 3 meals in the process. The 19-country delegates of the subcommittee reviewed and approved the draft, and later the full Congress did the same. The following day, the first IARU officers were elected by the delegates in a strictly ham meeting reeking with international good fellowship, wrote Warner. We'll continue this segment next week. Included in this material are quotes from the following: J.K. Bowles, The Ham Lets Loose Both Barrels, QST, November 1923, page 12. K.B. Warner, International Amateur Radio, Editorial, QST, February 1924, page 7. K.B. Warner, Our New Constitution, Editorials, QST, February 1924, page 7. H.P. Maxim, The International Amateur Radio Union, QST, May 1924, page 16. K.B. Warner, Election Results, QST, June 1924, page 19. K.B. Warner, The Annual Board Meeting, QST, September 1924, page 22. K.B. Warner, All Aboard for Paris, QST, March 1925, page 26. K.B. Warner, International Amateur Radio Union formed, QST, June 1925, page 9. With a tip of the TWIAR cap to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. While spending some quality time discovering what I don't know about GNU Radio, I explored the notion of attempting to at least understand a little more about how an FM signal works. Depending on your background, the letters FM mean different things. In amateur radio, it's a way to encode information, generally audio, using something called frequency modulation. Outside the hobby, the letters point at commercial broadcast radio. While the two are related, they're not the same thing. In amateur radio use, FM is a single channel of mono audio. However, in commercial broadcast radio, there's a whole lot more going on. Interesting because it gives you ready-made access to a composite signal that's just complicated enough to be challenging without being so complex that you need to spend hours on understanding the thing. In essence, a commercial FM broadcast signal is multiple channels encoded in a specific and documented way. This is helpful since you can compare the documentation against ready-made examples and replicate the process for yourself. In case you're new here, I'm in the process of building a radio system in software using GNU Radio in a project called Bold Yak. Specifically, the Bold Yak project aims to create a modular, bidirectional and distributed signal processing and control system that leverages GNU Radio. It's called Bold Yak because by the time I'm done, the yak is likely well and truly shaved. One of the easy things to forget when you're using GNU Radio Companion is that the blocks you're connecting together on the screen into a flow graph actually represent software generated when you either build or run the flow graph. This code is currently generated in either Python or C++, making me wonder, what does the code look like? And more specifically, what code would be needed to decode FM? It turns out that an old friend, the pysdr.org website, has a whole chapter dedicated to this process. Chapter 18, the end-to-end example, details how you can decode one of the channels embedded within a commercial FM broadcast, the RDS or Radio Data System signal. If you're not familiar, the pysdr.org website represents a whole book about software-defined radio and Python. It goes into as much or as little detail as you want to explain how this whole software malarkey works, and takes you by the hand down the path of discovery. So, armed with a working example, I followed along the bouncing ball and made a working RDS decoder, and, I think, understood most of it. There's a few interesting wrinkles that I've contacted the author, Dr. Mark Lichtman, about, and we'll see what comes of that. Here's the kicker. The author, who is also a senior member of the GNU Radio team, started with a GNU Radio flow graph and reversed engineered what was happening to get to the point of the code that's available in pysdr.org Chapter 18. This is significant because it creates a relationship between the code I have in front of me and the code generated by GNU Radio, which means that when I start with a new flow graph, not only do I know the steps required, I also know that the outcome is predetermined, as in, I already know that there's a solution. Having professionally written software for over 40 years, I can tell you that this is not often the case. I realize that I can search the internet for an RDS decoder flow graph, but that's unlikely to get me to a better understanding of what GNU Radio is doing. Once I've clarified with the author, I'll add the code to my GitHub project, 50 Things You Can Do with a Software-Defined Radio, specifically receive road traffic information, since, among other things, that's carried by RDS. As an aside, Roden Schwartz have a lovely YouTube video on the topic, Understanding the Radio Data System, which is giving me a whole set of ideas about things we might attempt with amateur radio repeaters. But that's a story for another time. Meanwhile, have you considered what other signals exist on the RS spectrum that you might want to decode and how you'd go about this? I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
Astronauts prepared the International Space Station for the addition of a new solar array on the first U.S. spacewalk in almost a year. Expedition 74 crewmates Jessica Meir and Chris Williams, KJ5GEW, ventured outside of the space station's Quest airlock at 12:52 UTC on Wednesday, March 18th, to install a mount for an advanced power-producing solar panel. The pair worked on the left or port side of the space station's backbone truss, where they first assembled and then attached the bracket structure that will support an ISS rollout array, or IROSA, to be installed on a future spacewalk. NASA had scheduled for the IROSA kit to be installed during a spacewalk in January, but one of the then-assigned spacewalkers, Mike Fink, KE5AIT, had an undisclosed medical issue that required the excursion to be canceled and he and his crewmates to return to Earth a month early. The space station's original solar arrays have degraded, having exceeded their 15-year service life. When all of them are in place, the new IROSAs will increase the orbiting lab's electricity supply by 20% to 30%. The additional power on the ISS will help support expanded commercial activities and the upcoming transition from the ISS to commercially operated space stations. Wednesday's spacewalk ended at 1954 UTC, 7 hours and 2 minutes after it began.
It is time for this week's look at AMSAT's satellite shorts from all over. We begin this week with news that NASA's moon rocket returned to the launch pad after repairs inside the vehicle assembly building at the Kennedy Space Center. The rocket's rollout to Pad 39B was completed at noon local time on March 20th and sets up a launch attempt for Artemis II mission no earlier than April 1st. Next, Prime Minister Mark Carney has announced that the Canadian government is investing $200 million towards Canada's first launch pad. The site is owned by Maritime Launch Services, a Canadian commercial space company founded in 2016 and headquartered in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The funds will be put toward a 10-year lease on the launch pad located near Canso, Nova Scotia, which is expected to finish construction by 2028. And finally this week, the German-wide Space Day will take place on Saturday, March 28, 2026. AMSAT DL and the Bowen Observatory will participate with a varied program of interesting short talks and presentations on the topics of space travel, astronomy, STEM education, and amateur radio. At the same time, an ESERO Family Day will take place on this day from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. in and around the dome of Bowen Observatory under the motto Adventure Space. Fun and interesting facts for young and old await visitors. They can embark on a journey of discovery and immerse themselves in the world of astronomy and space travel.
Many current amateur radio operators were attracted to the hobby by the aromas emanating from their Elmer's ham shack, from the slight smell of dust burning on red-hot vinyl tubes to the more pleasant smell of a hot soldering iron. For more details on this story, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, at League Headquarters, who has this report.
For the past 5 years, the Andrew Johnston Amateur Radio Club's Wednesday night's technology program at the Greene County Makerspace in Greenville, Tennessee, has been helping students explore a unique introduction to amateur radio with a little solder smoke, too. Recently, the students completed a 2-month build project for the Solder Smoke Direct Conversion Receivers Challenge. It's one of the many projects made possible by an ARRL grant. The students, some who are not yet licensed, took on a challenge to individually construct, solder, test, and then troubleshoot their receivers, all the while learning about the basics of a radio receiver and the related test questions associated with gaining an amateur radio license. ARRL member Steve Bible, N7HPR, has been the lead trainer and wrote the narrative for the project. The ARRL grant allowed us to purchase equipment and projects so we could create a science, technology, and engineering and mathematics STEM curriculum, said Bible. Over the past 3 years, upwards of 24 students have participated in the program, and 50% have received their amateur licenses. Bible added that there was often a wow moment when students realized that what they could accomplish on their own time and at their own pace. Using the narrative that Bible wrote, he now wants to expand and begin teaching the trainers how to administer the program to create more opportunities for youngsters and older adults as well. The spider-like approach will allow for more opportunities to understand the technology. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Bible also said there are more opportunities at the nearby Walters State Community College and their Hamtastic radio technology camps, which are set for June 2026.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. For those of you who enjoy working FO29, a reminder that digital modes are not allowed on this satellite. This is because operations are not permitted under the satellite's original licensing from Japanese authorities. The transponder is explicitly licensed for SSB and CW modes only. Japan's Ministry of Internal Affairs does not authorize digital emissions on the linear transponder frequencies. Even though you may not be in Japan, keep in mind, operators attempting digital modes risk noncompliance with international amateur radio etiquette and could contribute to transponder overload, distortion, or temporary shutdowns. Issues exacerbated by the high duty cycle nature of many digital signals. So please, do not attempt to use FO29 for anything other than SSB or CW. The new satellite Tenko 2 has its own NORAD CAT ID now. It is 68261, for those that are looking for the two-line elements. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's look at solar weather and the terrestrial propagation forecast. The largest event of the period was a C3.7 flare on March 25th from region 4400. Region 4403, which was numbered last period, is the suspected source of several flares observed beyond the limb prior to its rotation onto the disk. Due to its proximity to the northeast limb, foreshortening continues to prevent a definitive characterization of its complexity and extent. The remaining disk regions exhibited varying degrees of decay and evolution. Region 4397 has dissipated into a small unipolar group, while region 4398 underwent penumbral decay. Region 4399 remained largely stable, though. It continues to fluctuate between a unipolar and bipolar state due to the short-lived trailing spots. Significant internal changes were noted in the more complex groups. Region 4400 experienced extensive reconfiguration and flux emergence and gained a gamma configuration. Region 4401 exhibited persistent flux emergence and an expansion of penumbral area in its trailing spots. Region 4402 showed a decline in its leader spot cluster. No Earth-directed coronal mass ejections were observed in the available coronagraph imagery. Solar activity is expected to be low with a chance for M-class minor to moderate flares all the way through March 28th. For the first several hours of the reporting period, solar wind parameters reflected the continued waning influence of a negative polarity coronal hole high-speed stream. During this time, solar wind speed decreased from approximately 550 kilometers per second to 515 kilometers per second. On March 25th, a transient coronal mass ejection began its passage through the near-Earth environment. It was accompanied by a rise in solar wind speed to a peak of 633 kilometers per second. Solar wind parameters are expected to remain mildly enhanced as current influences diminish. Additional enhancements are anticipated on March 26th, following the arrival of another component of the March 22nd coronal mass ejection. Following this passage, a gradual return to a nominal, slow-speed regime is forecast through March 28th. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Carl Lewetzel-Swab K9LA. And this reminder, for custom propagation charts, visit the VOA-CAP Online for Ham Radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week, March 27th to 28th, it's the Sasquatch Stomp, that is CW. March 28th to 29th, the CQWWWPX contest, single sideband and phone. March 28th and 29th as well, the Africa All Mode International DX contest, CW phone and digital. April 2nd through 3rd, the Walk for the Bacon QRP contest, that is CW. Remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions. March 28th, it's the Central Dakota Amateur Radio Club Hamfest hosting the ARRL North Dakota State Convention. That's in Bismarck, North Dakota. April 4th, the RARS Fest hosting the ARRL Roanoke Division Convention. That's in Raleigh, North Carolina. And April 10th to the 11th, the Greene County Hamfest hosting the ARRL Oklahoma Section Convention. That's in Claremore, Oklahoma. Remember to search the ARRL Hamfest and Convention database to find more events in your area. And this quick reminder, the deadline for completed projects for the ARRL Student Coding Competition is Tuesday, March 1st, 2026. The competition, which began on January 1st, challenges young amateur radio licensees to create a mobile app that ARRL can build on to offer members with appropriate attribution. A winning entry will be awarded a prize of up to $25,000. Visit coding.arrl.org for details.
The International Amateur Radio Union Satellite Frequency Coordination Committee has recently completed frequency coordination for 2 CubeSat missions, Taiwan's Lilium 4 and Montenegro's Luca 01. These coordinations ensure that the satellites can operate without interfering with other space-based communications, paving the way for their upcoming launches and contributions to scientific research, education, and ham radio communities worldwide. Lilium 4, a 6U CubeSat developed by National Formosa University, is set to enhance amateur radio connectivity and optical experimentation in space. The satellite, with call sign BN0YCA, will feature a 1200 bit per second AX.25 APRS digipeater on 145.825 MHz for global intercommunication among radio enthusiasts. It also includes UHF telemetry downlink at 437.850 MHz and a high-bandwidth S-band downlink at 2405.0 MHz for monitoring an onboard optical payload. Additional capabilities involve a VU repeater with uplink at 145.980 MHz and downlink at 435.250 MHz, plus GNSS positioning using the L1 signal at 1575.42 MHz. The mission focuses on student-led studies of space-to-ground optical signal acquisition, with unencrypted telemetry encouraging public participation in decoding and link budget validation. IARU coordination for Lilium 4 was finalized on January 31, 2026, following a submission in late December 2025. The satellite is slated for launch no earlier than mid-March 2026 aboard a SpaceX rocket from Vandenberg Space Force Base, targeting a 510-kilometer polar orbit. Luca 01 represents Montenegro's entry into amateur satellite technology, spearheaded by Montenegro Space Research. This one CubeSat is designed for educational outreach, equipped with a charged particle sensor and a miniature camera to capture Earth's surface images. It will transmit special slow-scan television images and telemetry data to engage radio amateurs, students, and schoolchildren, using an open protocol for easy reception with affordable equipment. The mission aims to inspire young people in amateur radio and space science, including efforts to image various orbital objects. Downlinks have been coordinated on UHF frequencies, 437.180 MHz primary and 436.150 MHz spare, employing GMSK modulation at rates between 2.4 kilobits per second and 19.2 kilobits per second. Coordination was completed on March 13, 2026, after an application submitted on February 6, 2026. Luca 01 is planned for a Roscosmos launch from the Vostochny Cosmodrome into a 500 to 600 kilometer sun-synchronous orbit.
From June 26 through June 28, 2026, the amateur radio community will gather for the 49th time at Ham Radio in Friedrichshafen, Germany, one of Europe's largest ham fests. Under the motto, Discover the Sky, Amateur Radio meets Astronomy Europe's largest amateur radio exhibition and is taking a step further and shining even brighter with an Astro Trade Fair, which will be held concurrently for the first time on Saturday, June 27th, 2026. We look forward to welcoming renowned companies, new ideas, and a full 3-day program.
The worlds of amateur radio and ionospheric science came together once again on March 14th and 15th at the 9th Annual HAMSAT Workshop. To tell us more about this year's workshop, we go to League headquarters, where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this report.
This year, HAMSAT 2026 was hosted by ARRL and held at Central Connecticut State University, just minutes away from ARRL headquarters in Newington, Connecticut. HAMSAT, the Ham Radio Science Citizen Investigation Program, encourages radio amateurs to collect data that scientists use in their research on ionospheric phenomena. This year's workshop featured 17 oral presentations, 3 tutorials, 5 demonstrations, and 31 posters, and through researchers from Virginia Tech, St. Francis University, Dartmouth College, Boston College, and others. ARRL CEO David Minster, NA2AA, welcomed participants at the conference opening, followed by Dr. Nathaniel Fussell, W2NAF, lead organizer of the HAMSAT community, who set the stage for the weekend's activities. The keynote speaker at Saturday evening's banquet was NASA astrophysicist and citizen science officer Dr. Mark Kuchner. The workshop also included a field trip to tour ARRL headquarters, and attendees were invited to participate in late-night operating from the iconic W1AW station. One overriding theme of the conference was that you don't need to be a physicist to contribute to valuable data. HAMSAT's basic personal space weather station, which costs about $100, can observe space weather effects both as a single-point measurement and as part of a larger distributed network. The group has made data collection fun with such activities as the Solar Eclipse QSO Party and Meteor Scattered QSO Party. One presentation demonstrated how ham observations and measurements captured ionospheric effects during 2 recent solar eclipses. At Sunday morning's poster session, University of Scranton student Owen Rozansky, KD3ALD, described a project to develop a dashboard of HF contesting, DXing, and general operations using data from the Personal Space Weather Station and other remote sources. The project is intended to enhance the real-time propagation assessments sought by amateur radio operators. For many participants, the chance to operate from W1AW was a highlight of the weekend. ARRL Senior Director of Marketing and Innovation Bob Interbitson, NQ1R, described the atmosphere at the station as energetic. All 6 guest operating positions were occupied until closing time at 11:30 p.m. on Saturday. ARRL extends its thanks to many partners supporting HAMSAT 2026, including the University of Scranton, New Jersey Institute of Technology, the National Science Foundation, NASA, Amateur Radio Digital Communications, and more. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Participants were treated to a first-ever 630-meter contact from W1AW, a contact with the J51A de-expedition to Guinea-Bissau, and a QSO between W1AW and a remotely controlled station in Bonaire, operated by Bob Interbitson as PJ4NQ1R, with both control operators in the same room. The roughly 35 visiting operators had a chance to use equipment from multiple manufacturers, notably ICOM, Yaesu, Kenwood, and Flex Radio. Ryusuke Takada, JI1 VHV, who had traveled from Japan to attend the workshop, made 46 contacts in 20 minutes. Each visitor left with a personalized certificate, and several considered it to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
The Radio Club of America and International Wireless Communications Expo honored 5 young communications professionals, including at least 1 ham radio operator, at a special breakfast on Thursday, March 19th, during the 2026 IWC Expo in Las Vegas, Nevada. The Young Professionals program of the Radio Club of America and International Wireless Communications Expo celebrates industry professionals who have at least 2 years' experience in wireless communications and who are no more than 40 years of age. The RCA website calls these young professionals the next generation of innovators shaping the field. This year, the program recognized at least 1 amateur radio operator, Andy Hyun, Kilo Alpha 6, November Delta Yankee, a telecommunications system engineer in the Interoperable Radio Systems Division of the County of Los Angeles Internal Services Department. His work on the spectrum management team includes a specialty in interference mitigation. He also supports mission-critical public safety communications. Other honorees are Precious Fodor, who serves as the National Service Manager at Eastern Communications Limited, Max Johnson, an electrical engineer at Dark Wolf Ventures in Colorado, a firm specializing in advanced radio and satellite communications systems. Sean Martin, a sales professional in the aerospace and defense industry, and Chris Vargas, whose 10-year career in sales has most recently brought him into consumer electronics. He is presently working for ICOM. The group was praised by attendees for their achievements and for the promise their careers hold in shaping the field of wireless communications in new directions.
The SciTech Amateur Radio Society in Natick, Massachusetts recently hosted a Girl Scout troop from Melrose, Massachusetts for a first contact opportunity to learn about amateur radio. For more details on this first contact session, we go to League headquarters where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this special report.
New England SciTech is a nonprofit STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math education center and makerspace dedicated to project-based hands-on learning for youth and families across New England. In the first of many activities, the Scouts got to hold a meteorite from an asteroid and then one from the moon and discuss Earth-to-space communication and then watch a 3-minute ARRL video about ham radio. Barbara Irby then talked about ways girls can get involved with ham radio and become a young lady YL licensed amateur radio operator. Jacqueline, a young student waiting to take her license, gave an insightful and encouraging talk about her journey to get a radio license with suggestions to the Scouts for success. Then it was on to a 2-minute video about the workshop where ham radio is highlighted with high-altitude weather balloon launches, followed by a fox hunt with Seth Kendall, who showed off his homemade Yagi antenna that helped the girls find the hidden transmitter. The final activities of the day had the Scouts in the radio room where they listened to contacts made with astronaut Bob Hines on the International Space Station. Then the girls lined up at an HF station where they all got to make a contact with a YL named Jessica James, KJ5NSH in Oklahoma. Events like this one are virtually important for the hobby, said ARRL New England Division Vice Director Phil Temples, K9HI. To be able to reach out to young girls and put them in contact with mentors who are licensed amateur radio operators is just a great opportunity, he said. STAR's secretary and lead organizer Bob Finney, K5TEC, noted that at the end of the event, the Scouts each got an ARRL First Contact Award certificate. They were also thrilled to receive an ARRL radio patch and a SciTech logo patch. Fun was had by all and lots of learning, too. Finney also encourages Scout leaders to get their troops involved in amateur radio because it can become a lifetime of activities and lead to a lifelong hobby. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The instructors from SciTech included Barbara Irby, KC1KGS, Jocelyn, who is waiting to take her test, Seth Kendall, KC1PZY, Max Kendall, WZMXX, Brad Moore, KC1TUY, Zachary Sherman, KC1NXK, and lead organizer and instructor Bob Finney, K5TEC. Visit the ARRL website for more information about the ARRL radio and wireless technology patch program and for amateur radio and scouting resources.
A high school teacher in New York City, with help from the ARRL Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology, has successfully licensed nearly 700 students in the past 2 years as part of a wide-ranging program that is teaching students in 2 schools that radio today is a central part of just about everything. On March 12th, ARRL Director of Education and Learning Steve Goodgame, Kilo 5 Alpha Tango Alpha, and Hudson Division Director Ed Wilson, November 2, X-Ray Delta Delta, traveled to Staten Island Technical High School to help lead teacher Everton Henrique, Kilo Delta 2 Zulu Zulu Tango, administer license exams to 143 students, resulting in 131 new hams and 14 upgrades. According to Goodgame, Henrique's formula for success is getting kids engaged with lots of hands-on stuff. He says everything is project-based, and there is lots of crossover to the school's robotics program. Now, adds Goodgame, he's working with a teacher at the adjacent McKee High School, which is a vocational high school, and the students are working together on a solar car program. Wilson noted that he's very impressed to see the vocational kids and the technical kids working together, teaching each other their respective skills. Goodgame says Staten Island Technical High School is the donor-funded Teachers Institute's first model school, which makes it eligible for additional resources and equipment. He notes that the school was the site of a Teachers Institute session last year and will host another this year. Good Game adds that Henrique has completed 2 Teachers Institute modules and is now an Institute instructor, as well as being a facilitator for Math for America and co-developer of a 9-week course for teachers on how to use amateur radio in the classroom.
Are the HF bands useful for long-distance communications to remote areas? The U.S. military just did their own exercise to prove what hams have known for years. Communicating under simulated emergency conditions on HF, members of the military in Alaska demonstrated something that hams have known all along. Radio carries the message. The recent activity known as Exercise Arctic Connect might well be called Field Day or an Aries drill for the military. According to the U.S. Army's website, over 30 operators in 28 different locations across Alaska recently took part in the exercise, a radio test to show that HF communications are vital in areas that are separated by extreme terrain, weather, and distances. The test was conducted by Alaska Organized Militia, which includes the Alaska Army and Air National Guard, the Alaska State Defense Force, members of the Civil Air Patrol, the State of Alaska Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and representatives from the National Guard Bureau. Colonel Christy Brewer, Alaska National Guard Director of Joint Operations, said, "Our responsibility is to the people of Alaska. That means ensuring we can maintain command and control across a state where terrain, weather, and distance test every system. This exercise validates the partnerships and redundant pathways that allow us to respond decisively when communities need us."
Australian company Advanced Navigation has successfully demonstrated its inertial-centric intelligent navigation as part of the United States Army's All-Domain Persistent Experiment, showing the company's technology has the ability to provide reliable, high-accuracy navigation in Global Navigation Satellite System or GNSS degraded and denied conditions. Unlike conventional systems reliant on GNSS or magnetic compasses, Boreas D90 determines true north through Eurocompassing, using ultra-sensitive fiber-optic gyroscopes to detect the Earth's rotation. This enables independent, high-confidence navigation, even when external GNSS signals are compromised. In today's contested environment, the adversary will deny, degrade, and spoof GNSS signals. Relying on a single technology for navigation is a mission-ending vulnerability, said Chris Shaw, Advanced Navigation's CEO. The only path to operational advantage is an intelligent, multi-sensor fusion, anchored by a resilient inertial core. We deliver this with our sophisticated Australian AdNav intelligence software. Advanced Navigation said the next experiment will include partners within the United States Air Force's 746th Test Squadron and the Joint Navigation Warfare Center, the U.S. Army Combat Capabilities Development Command, and the Army Test and Evaluation Command. Advanced Navigation looks forward to returning in 2026.
Geoff G4FKA has recently been awarded the first supreme level of the Worked All UK and Crown Dependency Prefixes Award. This award was introduced in 2025, and as Geoff says, the series is good as it makes us go back to basics, working our own local stations often overlooked in the hunt for DX. In recent years, he has started claiming awards such as DXCC, WAS, and WAZ, among others. In late 2024, Geoff started taking an interest in the various on-the-air programs such as Castles, Parks, and Summits. He found he was spending more time on 40 meters hunting the UK activators, and this in itself increased the number of UK prefixes being worked, along with the many special event calls that had appeared during the year. When the Worked All UK and Crown Dependency Prefixes Award series launched, it was obvious to him that he should see what prefixes he had already worked in 2025 and then spend more time seeking out the remaining UK stations. RSGB Awards Manager Lindsay Pennell, GI3KME, says this is a substantial achievement requiring dedication, perseverance, and a good understanding of propagation for intra-G working. Lindsay adds, this award series is available to all radio amateurs and shortwave listeners in the UK and worldwide. I've received applications from as far afield as Japan and the USA. We hope it will inspire homegrown talent to start chasing the awards and for clubs to start putting special club call signs on the air to provide the rarer call sign prefixes.
The Intercontinental Amateur Traffic Net is seeking additional net control stations to staff open slots in the mornings or as occasional relief operators. The net operates every morning at 0700 through noon Eastern Time on 14.3 megahertz. Net control stations work 1-hour shifts. The Intercon Net was formed in 1960 to promote goodwill and friendly relations among radio amateurs everywhere. The net handles third-party traffic and provides emergency communications to any station when needed, and offers operating training and improvement programs to its members. The Maritime Mobile Service Net, which is a different organization, takes over on the same frequency at noon Eastern Time. They share their proprietary logging program with the Intercon Net. All licensed general class amateur radio operators are welcome to check in. Visit interconnet.us for more information.
Amateur radio's largest international cooperative special event is getting on the air for a week with an important message about people with autism. Now in its 4th year, the World Autism Awareness Week special event will again carry the message that it's okay to be different. It's a theme uniting amateurs across oceans, with call signs that include Whiskey 2 Alpha here in the U.S. and others in participating nations such as Italy, South Africa, Russia, New Zealand, Australia, Argentina, Israel, and West Malaysia. This week-long special event begins on Wednesday, April 1st. It has gained momentum as it brings advocacy on the air for those with autism spectrum disorder, a developmental disorder seen among people of all races and nationalities. More details about the event and its call signs, as well as useful information about autism spectrum disorder, can be found on the QRZ.com page of Whiskey 2 Alpha.
3 radio amateur operators have been inducted into the Heritage CQ Amateur Radio Hall of Fame for 2026. Professor David B. Leeson, Ph.D., W6NL. Leeson was first licensed in 1952. He is the author of the ARRL book Physical Design of Yagi Antennas and was a designer of the International Amateur Radio Union International Beacon Network. Since 1994, he has been consulting professor at Stanford University and is faculty advisor of the Stanford Amateur Radio Club, W6YX. He drove a race car, retiring in 1979, returning to ham radio after back-to-back national championships. Richard Dean Straw, N6BV, Silent Key, a renowned antenna expert. Straw was part of the Navy project in the early 1990s to measure HF dipole and vertical antennas in front of hill, on top of hill, and behind a hill in Utah. The team used a helicopter that towed either a 3-axis receiver or a transmitter that was developed by SRI International in Menlo Park, California. This system was used for measuring and verifying antenna performance, mainly for the military. Straw retired from the staff of the ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio, in 2008, following 15 years of service as the Senior Assistant Technical Editor. While working for the ARRL, Straw edited 5 editions of the ARRL Antenna Book, the most of any named editor, 4 volumes of the ARRL Antenna Compendium, editions 4 through 7, and several editions of the ARRL Handbook. He became a Silent Key in 2025. Dr. Jose Otis Vicens, NP4G, first licensed at the age of 16, Otis, known to his friends and fellow operators on the air as NP4G, developed a passion for amateur radio. Born and raised in Humacao, Puerto Rico, he is the only amateur radio operator in his family. Otis later moved to the United States to study biology at Purdue University, where he became active with the W9YB Amateur Radio Club. Otis is very active in Puerto Rico's ham radio scene. He is past president of the Puerto Rican Amateur Radio League and is currently president of the International DX Association. Otis also received the 2026 Amateur of the Year Award from the Dayton Hamvention. You can read more about the 2026 inductees at the Heritage CQ Amateur Radio Hall of Fame, created by CQ Magazine and currently administered by the K8CX Ham Gallery.
A Weekly Net has begun exploring how amateur radio can provide mentorship at historically black colleges and universities in the U.S. The OMIK Amateur Radio Association has launched the first of its Tuesday night nets designed to build connections with historically black college and universities throughout the U.S. The Ham Radio Organization was originally created in August of 1952 as a welcoming group for black amateurs seeking membership without having to face discrimination. OMIK eventually hopes to extend its expertise and the hand of friendship to many of the more than 100 historically black U.S. campuses and their faculty, alumni, parents, and students. Net check-ins begin at 8 p.m. Eastern Time Tuesdays, which is 0100 UTC Wednesday on the OMIK conference server on Echolink. The net is one part of the group's emerging commitment to the campuses. For OMIK members, the goal will ultimately bring opportunities to provide service and make connections across the generations. On-campus visits, and even on-air activations, will help students gain mentors in STEM and STEAM learning and, of course, amateur radio. Net controller Jesse Alexander WB2IFS, the developer of the program, said the net is just the beginning.
A story that we've been following about aircraft avionics now includes a federal mandate. The Federal Aviation Administration has ordered that airlines flying Boeing's 787 Dreamliners now have to inspect and repair faulty onboard transponders. According to a report at aviationatoz.com, the move is expected to cost U.S. airlines nearly $8 million. United Airlines, American Airlines, and Alaska Airlines, who operate from hubs including Chicago's O'Hare and L.A. International Airports, are among those affected by the FAA Airworthiness Directive. It states that certain Boeing 787 transponders can fail when they're exposed to continuous wave signals, including those generated by Morse code from military transmitters and amateur transmissions. Such signals, when encountered by the aircraft's Mode S transponder, may cause a failure to respond to radar interrogation. Air traffic control systems rely on those responses to track aircraft positions accurately. Without a correct relay from the transponder, controllers, quote, may temporarily lose visibility on their radar display. Additionally, the onboard traffic collision avoidance system may not generate alerts correctly, reducing a critical safety safeguard designed to prevent mid-air collision. Tests conducted by the FAA showed a nearly 90% failure rate of interrogation attempts in environments with CW interference, which prompted a corrective solution order. The directive applies globally to Boeing 787 aircraft equipped with the affected transponder model. However, FAA's financial assessment only covers aircraft registered to U.S. airlines that have up to 4 years to complete the required inspections and modifications. The directive has the support of Boeing and the Airline Pilots Association. However, operational concerns were expressed by several airlines who have requested a delay.
Mark the date of April 14th on your calendar. If you know your history, you'll recall that at 23:40 ship's time on that day, the RMS Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic, bringing its inaugural sailing to a fatal end. Mark this year's calendar, as well, from 0000 UTC on April 10th to 23:59 on April 15th. That time period marks the date of the luxury liner's voyage from Southampton, which ended with its sinking. The Titanic Memorial Special Events Station EG-1912T will be on the air using all modes HF, VHF, UHF, and SHF during that period, organized by the Union of Radio Amateurs of Vigo Val Minor. A number of Spanish citizens were on board the ship. The activation will focus on CW to honor Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, the first and second telegraphers on board. The activation also honors Harold Cottam, the telegrapher on board the Carpathia, the first ship to make a rescue effort at the site of the doomed Titanic. There will be a special QSL card for hams contacting EG-1912T and CW. All other QSLs will be sent via the Bureau, or over EQSL or Logbook of the World.
According to the New York Times, the Voice of America broadcast service, which had been shut down amid controversy last year, is headed back into service. Judge Royce C. Lamberth of the U.S. District Court in the District of Columbia reversed actions taken last year by the Trump administration to shutter the Voice of America and ordered VOA's journalists to return to work and the news service to resume broadcasting. Judge Lamberth had earlier ruled that the appointment of Kari Lake was illegal, hence voiding all layoffs and shutdowns which she made. The Voice of America, founded in 1942 to combat Nazi propaganda in World War II, had been broadcasting in 49 languages to over 360 million people around the world when it was shut down. If Judge Royce's ruling stands, their goal is to return to that level. The Voice of America Museum, an amateur radio club in Westchester, Ohio, a popular attraction during Hamvention, is not connected with or affected by this current situation.
And our final story this week tells us how a group is chartering a flight to the space station. Here's the story. The European Space Agency has announced plans to charter a flight to the ISS for its astronauts and some international partners. Just 2 years before the International Space Station's scheduled retirement, it is expected to receive a crew of European astronauts delivered via chartered SpaceX Crew Dragon mission. Joseph Ashbacher, Director General of the European Space Agency, said at a March 19th press briefing that the ESA was chartering the flight to give the agency's astronauts an experience aboard the ISS to conduct research before the spacecraft is decommissioned and deorbited in 2030. The trip by the provided institutional crew is being proposed for early 2028. The ESA expects to include international partners in the mission, but has not named any potential partner nations, nor has it said how many non-ESA astronauts would be included. Both the UAE and Australian Space Agency's websites report that agreements were signed in recent years, with the European Space Agency committing to deeper collaboration in space exploration initiatives.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77 @gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeater systems all around the U.S. and around the world on great operations like WA0RCR from the center of the U.S., Wentzville, Missouri, where This Week in Amateur Radio is proud to be part of the legendary Gateway 160-meter net report each weekend. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.